Lejla, please tell my story. I met my boyfriend when I was 22, and like most abusive relationships, things were fine in the beginning. We were friends and we had a great connection. He was alluring and he knew how to draw you in with his charm. He was confident and full of dreams, and in my shaky self-esteem, I found this attractive. From the very beginning, he made comments about my clothes, how I was too nice to his friends, or that I was boring for wanting to go home after a night out. Everything we did was on his terms. If we couldn't go on holiday together, I knew that I couldn't go on holiday on my own without him, through the fear of emotional abuse and all the other repercussions. He treated me as though I was inferior and regularly criticised me by saying that I wasn't good enough, I wasn't wife material, a bad friend, a bad person. He referred to me as being crazy, mad and abusive, particularly if I accused him of abusing me. I would often receive hundreds of messages per day at work, picking fights with me, arguing, being nasty about me. I would hide in the work toilets and I would cry, and then I would go home and he would act like everything was fine. I felt like there was absolutely no escape for me. I minimised the abuse because he behaved so normally in person, despite my constant worry that he would pay me back in some way, somehow. He regularly antagonised and laughed at me, allowing me to feel insecure, humiliated or angry. I was often sick to my stomach at the torrent of disgusting words that he'd send me each day. His intimidation tactics included threats to tell my friends and family just how crazy I was and to inform them that I was the abusive one in the relationship. Although he didn't shout at me, he always insulted me by calling me fat and ugly. He regularly told me that I must be on my period or that I'm too much of a feminist any time I was upset about something. And when he cheated on me, he didn't say a single word in response. I was never allowed to be angry or upset. Silence was his form of controlling me. He burrowed into my head and twisted my thoughts until I either believed him or gave up answering him back. He regularly gaslit me by saying things like, "That didn't happen. It wasn't that bad. I didn't mean it. You deserved it. It was your fault, not mine. You're a crazy bitch. You don't know what you're saying. You need to learn to control yourself. Change, or I can't be with you." I questioned my sense of reality. I went into survival mode and moved from being extremely upset to silent. I lost count of how many times I held in my tears and it ate away at me. I doubted my own experience so much because it seemed nobody else was seeing the things that I was. Everybody got to see this calm, collected, easygoing man, whereas behind closed doors, I knew him as controlling and manipulative. He would often steal, break, or hide my possessions. The abuse eventually led to physical violence too. The very first time he assaulted me, he slapped me in the neck outside of a bar for mentioning his ex-girlfriend, who he told me was crazy. I was hysterical. His friend's reaction was that I must have done something and that I deserved it, and he remained totally silent. The second time he assaulted me was more sinister. He grabbed me by the neck completely out of the blue on my bed. He held my neck long enough for me to panic, and then he lay back down as if nothing had happened. I was in shock, but climbed back into bed. I suspect this was the moment he realised that he could do these things and get away with it. He attacked me in a bar once, pushing me to the floor and hitting me. He slapped me on a few more occasions, grabbed me by the neck and pushed me against the wall. He regularly accused me of cheating and tracked my location as he had access to my Apple ID. He would stalk my whereabouts when I was out with my friends, and just before I got pregnant, I considered leaving him. He knew he was losing his grip on me and he became more erratic. He isolated me from my friends and family, not by stopping me from seeing them, but by being negative about them, playing on my own insecurities and relationships with them. I eventually couldn't bear to see them too often due to the severe emotional abuse I would face. On some occasions, he also locked me out of the house by accident to stop me from leaving. I financed everything, often leaving me distressed and regularly asking family members for money, causing strain on my own relationships with them. He would manipulate me into giving him money to go out and gamble. The final serious assault happened after a night out. I decided I wanted to go home as I was drunk. Of course, he wanted to go to the casino and spend all the money that I had. I left and I got into a taxi. I remember I spotted him charging through the city centre. When I got home, I put the latch on the door and passed out on my bed. I guess I was just subconsciously frightened of him. I awoke to him punching me repeatedly in the face. He chased me around the flat, punching and kicking me. I screamed so loudly that he was going to kill me, and a neighbour across the road called the police. The nightmare didn't end there though. He began crying and begged me for forgiveness and that he would go to jail for a long time. He hid in a cupboard in my flat. When the police arrived, I was unable to speak, numbed by the pain and horrified at the blood that was dripping down from my hair. I had concussion, so the police stayed for 6 hours and told me to stay awake. I wish I'd been brave enough to point to the door that he was hiding in, but I just wasn't. The very next day, the flat looked like a war zone. Blood was splattered all across the floor and the curtains and the walls. The glass in the front door was completely smashed. It was horrific. He proceeded to clean the flat without saying a single word to me, and I left to meet my colleagues for a leaving night. I wanted to run away, but I felt like I couldn't. The next few weeks passed. I was hiding the bruises that had developed all over my body and my bloodshot eye. I was scared, traumatised, and in so much pain. I suffered a lot of pain behind my right eye for 2 years, and I continue to suffer it from it now when I'm tired. He told me that the only reason he stopped attacking me that night was because something changed in my face. I had stopped fighting back and accepted that I might die at the hands of him. After this event, I completely disassociated from the life-threatening violence I was experiencing. I felt like he had turned off a light inside me that I could never get back on. The damage was permanent. It might sound like an odd thing to say, but afterwards I was numb. So no amount of apologies from him or court appearances would change what happened to me and the physical and mental damage he caused me. At the time, I didn't press for a conviction. How wrong I was not to. The emotional, financial and social abuse continued. Pressure was applied and eased when he required control of me. Whilst I was pregnant, most forms of abuse, except financial, stopped. I guess I learned how to manage him. I knew everything about his behaviour and his triggers, so I stopped retaliating. Bizarrely, it was probably the only time I felt like he cared about my physical well-being. No doubt because I was carrying his child, which was merely a possession to him. My emotional health was completely neglected by him. I hoped things would continue to get better, but then I was contacted by social services regarding him being a possible danger to our unborn child. I was distraught. When I gave birth, social services had a full meeting to decide whether our son should be taken into care. I felt so alone and I cried constantly for days. I was in shock and I'd lay in bed with my son speechless before and after a meeting. He, of course, was full of false promises that things were going to get better. I couldn't tell anyone. I was too ashamed. Once social services stopped being involved, the emotional abuse accelerated again. I was often called a bad mother and that I was jealous of the relationship that he and my son had. Eventually, during a day away with work, he bombarded me with abusive messages despite the fact that I was forced to ask my parents to look after our son. He expected me to work full-time, take care of our son, cook and clean as soon as I was home. It was lonely, relentless and exhausting. He even stopped me from going to work on a few occasions. This added pressure to my relationship with my manager and my parents. Eventually, I fell out of love with him little by little. I felt so alone and trapped, but I knew I had to take the steps. I knew I needed to leave as quietly as possible to avoid any huge repercussions. I repeatedly told him that I didn't love him and that I didn't want to be with him for 8 months until I finally locked him out of the house one night. I no longer cared what would happen. I felt miserable and I knew that it would either be him or me that would end up dead. I had given up the fight and accepted that he would never change. I accepted that my son and I would be better off without him. But the stalking, harassment and verbal abuse continued for a year after leaving. He'd follow me home and demand to be the one to bath and put our son to bed. He also told me that he was glad he trapped me with a baby, that I was used goods and that nobody wanted me and I was evil for throwing away 6 years and our son would hate me for destroying our family. I managed our communication by grey rocking him. I wanted my son to have a relationship with him, so I did everything I could to facilitate it. There were so many red flags. What I also came to realise was that my needs were never fulfilled. I struggled with his real lack of compassion. I was naive and I very much hoped that I could change him. I lived an unhealthy, intense, toxic and lovesick relationship. And his behaviour was reckless. He was the ultimate bad boy and I thought I could handle him. But domestic abuse is calculated, premeditated and sustained. The recovery period will last my whole entire lifetime. And for that, I cannot and will not ever forgive him. I have compartmentalised aspects of the abuse and I have lost all energy to hate him. Hating would be an invaluable waste of my time and headspace. He does not deserve my thoughts. I felt nothing could ever really change what had happened to me, but I knew I had to stop suffering silently and break the cycle so I could find a way to move forward. I have finally allowed myself to cry about everything he took from me. Our relationship was toxic, fast-paced, cruel and destabilising. I was numbed with the doubt that I could do better. It was relentless, incredibly lonely and bewildering. It took time to see how scared I really was of him and to realise how my sense of self had been chipped away at for years. Unfortunately, abusers think that they can do this to women. They are misogynistic and dangerous, and they are fully supported by our culture. Women are either toys or pawns, and abusers never change. I remember every time my heart was pounding and my muscles tense, how vigilant I was in his footsteps, how he opened the door, how he messaged me, how I overanalyzed every interaction between us so that I didn't miss anything and could prepare myself for the wrath of abuse that was to come. The overwhelming guilt that I was unable to tell anyone how bad it really was has never left me. I felt uncertainty about whether he will try and gain access, if I will see him again, or if he contacts our son when he's older. Eventually, I gained the courage to report him, and I'm awaiting a trial. I feel relief that I've been able to share the secrets that I've kept all this time, but I'm equally devastated for my son having to relive all of this again. Although I'm unable to forgive him, I've accepted that sometimes in life you cannot forgive people who try every possible way to destroy you and your sense of joy. This has been a process that will last my entire lifetime. He was attracted to my empathetic and compassionate nature, and although I am loyal, understanding and forgiving, I know now that I cannot allow anyone to take advantage of it. Taking back control over my life and finding myself again has made me more confident than I ever thought. I have a supportive partner, friends, and a good relationship with my work colleagues, and it's given me strength throughout this process. My son brings me so much joy, and I will always keep going because of him. So please, ladies, don't ignore red flags. Please get help and get out. Please don't stay silent like I did.